welcome to our first episode of our podcast at Henceforward called The Long View. Carl Peter, this month is 5 years of Henceforward's existence. It's been a wild 5 years. It's been a fantastic 5 years. We've learned a lot. We've grown a lot in terms of our thinking and our business. We've, managed to really cement some of those deep thoughts about what Henceforward is about. Looking back, what were some of those early conversations that we had around, why the name Henceforward? And what does that represent? And, how do you think we've done towards that?
Yeah, it is crazy to think that we're already at the 5-year mark. And as they say, time flies when you're having fun. But I think we were, very deliberate when we started Henceforward about the idea of, wanting to look forward, henceforward, and do things differently. I think we'd kind of reached a point in our careers. We'd both been doing this a long time where we kind of saw and felt the inherent frustrations that are kind of typical in our industry, So we made the very conscious and deliberate choice of, we want to build Henceforward in our image and in a way that we think we can make a real difference to, people's lives, people's financial lives, and, even beyond that in terms of helping them achieve, what's important to them. And with any good idea or early business, there are always challenges, at the beginning. Things don't happen perfectly smoothly. Everything takes time. You put in huge amounts of work, and there's inevitably a delay in terms of, the payoff and the reward before you start seeing that. But, over the last sort of couple of years in particular, that growth we've started to experience really has felt like it started to become exponential. And I think that's a function of, not only our vision and our hard work, but kind of our brand getting out there, people starting to resonate with our philosophy, our value proposition, how we're different, how we go about things. And a lot of that is simply a function of, people really feel like, we on their side, I don't know kind of what your thoughts are on that,
I think it's like, when you're kind of building a house, you can have the best laid plans. And if anyone's ever dealt with a builder or a contractor, sometimes the building doesn't go according to plan. Maybe you don't have material. And so things don't always in the beginning kind of work out like how you want them to be, and I think so, we had these great ideas that were driven by pure passion, right? This build took a little bit longer to get where we are. But if we look back and we look at how far we've come, we've actually done phenomenally well. And I'm not talking about well from like a business, it's profitable, just in terms of, we made a significant departure from what people know as financial planning in South Africa. And, swimming upstream comes with its challenges. But I think if the one thing that we've learned, and when I talk about the success, is it's a success of knowing we're on the right path. The journey we walked with our clients, they've had great outcomes and their lives have changed significantly. And so, that passion, that vision, that pureness still exists quite deeply. Nothing that's changed. We've just amplified that. And I think, I have a lot of gratitude, obviously, for our clients because they've guided us in this journey, right? We had an idea, and again, our ideas were kind of born, through 2 decades of working with clients, but what we thought they wanted, and also what we thought if we were our own clients, how we would want to be treated and how we would like this advice process. So I have an immense gratitude looking back at the 5 years. It's been a great journey, and I'm super excited to see, Henceforward grow into the future, just to become more mainstream in our thinking,
Oh, absolutely. If we look at the possibilities of the next 5 years, I think it's both a super exciting and a super interesting time, not only for us as a business, but kind of where we are kind of in the world. There's a lot happening in the world, and a lot of change, a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty, particularly around things like, AI and how that's going to, impact things. And it's also in terms of our business, thinking about, how do we become better and more effective, doing what we do with all this flux and change happening, and, we like to think, with our kind of approach, there'll always be a role for, what we do and people like us in our business.
Mm-hmm.
So we've come a long way in the last 5 years, and we're super excited about, what's to come, and the validation we've received from the clients that we work with, and the support and the feedback. Yeah, it's been fantastic. So this feels like
So, I mean, the birth of the long view is really to kind of just like echo some of those like client conversations that we had and learnings out of there, to be able to take this out, to kind of share our philosophy to a bit more people. I think, we're not here to talk about products or strategies or anything like that. It's just to kind of create deeper questions for our clients, leave them with better questions, like what am I doing? What's this all about? And I think, maybe to kind of kick off in terms of today's topic, the topic is how much is enough. Very often, we met with new clients who ask us questions around, fund choices and tax optimization. But before we even get there, I think there's a question that we ask our clients often, but it's a question that not many people know when we start dealing with them. It's how much is enough?
And how much is enough is beyond just a number. Most people, when they ask that question, are looking for a number, because they want to know that, they're either on track or they're going to be okay. But there's a lot more to understanding how much is enough than putting a number on it, because it really is such a subjective and personal thing. And we've got clients across the spectrum, clients with, very significant amounts of money. And even they often have that anxiety and fear about, do we have enough? So that question of having enough, it's almost like it's always a moving target, and it's always evolving. And depending on life and your circumstances and what have you, you also have to be comfortable with knowing that that's something that, constantly evolves and changes. So they're almost deeper, more fundamental questions that kind of sit behind that. It's about, what's important to you, what matters to you in life. How do you like to spend your time? All those kinds of things are even more important than, trying to put a number on, what's enough, because we know that, that's so different for everybody. And that's a number that kind of changes and evolves all the time. So that's, hopefully part of what we can help people with today's conversation.
And I think that's why we wanted to kick off with that topic in our series. It's because that's really the start of everything, Before we look at clients' balance sheets, necessarily we want to know what it is that they're trying to achieve. They might be there, already. And so that's an important thing. So I think it kind of it sets the tone in our client conversations. And so I think it was quite fitting to kind of start today off with that question: how much is enough? Well, it's kind of been a journey. I remember in the early days, kind of getting frustrated with the lack of kind of, I would say success, but the speed at which we were kind of moving. And I think you kind of reminded me about the story about the Chinese bamboo shoots, and how, you do a lot of that work and you like those shoots don't come through the ground until after a while, but when they do, they start growing rapidly and tall. And I think as a brand and what we're doing, I think that's where we are now. I think our message is getting out. We're doing things differently. We're adding real value, and I think we continue to do that. So I think it's quite fitting. 5-year birthday of Henceforward is also the start of a podcast. And like our name represents, from this day on, to echo what you're saying, I hope from this day on we continue to add value in that way in these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think for any small business starting out, those first few years are, really tough. You got to roll up your sleeves and do a lot of hard work, and you don't actually see the benefits and payoff, of that immediately. There's always that, I guess, delayed response. But, the last sort of 2 years in particular, as we've seen that growth to really start to accelerate, our name and brand getting out there, people identifying with not only who we are, but how we do things and how we're different. And, our core philosophy's always been, client outcomes come first. And we always want to do what we think is in the best interest of our clients and not necessarily what's in the best interest of our pockets. And I think that authenticity and how we operate really kind of shines through.
Mm.
And that's why we've seen the amazing growth that we have, and that we can sit here now at, our 5-year birthday and really be excited about the next 5 years and what comes next. And start to share things in a format, hopefully via this podcast about, about that next evolution and journey in our chapter, if you like. So yeah, exciting times.
Absolutely. And I hope that authenticity comes across, when we make mistakes, and, looking forward to the blooper reels, afterwards. But I think that's what, we always see ourselves, we tell, potential clients, we like to see ourselves on the same side as the table as them. And so authenticity is quite, clear. But I guess, the topic of today and the sort of first topic of, the long view is how much is enough. Quite often clients come to us with different sets of questions, and it's kind of really asked up front. They come to us about optimization on markets and funds and costs and tax. But, when you kind of slow that conversation down, what they're really trying to do is to know, are they going to be okay?
Mm.
And leading on to that, it's just kind of like, and each client, each family, each setup has a different answer to that. How much is enough? But I think that's kind of the core. That's kind of where we want to start. It's kind of creating that. We talk about outcomes based, but it's kind of knowing where we're leading to know if we're on the right track. I read on a sugar packet once, it said if you don't know where you're going, all roads would lead you there. So I think that's where we want to start, is just kind of unpacking that topic of how much is enough.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's, it's such a fascinating and interesting topic because, we have clients, across the spectrum, some, very wealthy clients with, massive balance sheets, etc. And what's quite interesting is the fact that, whether you think you have, less money, more money, a lot of money, it's almost like a common theme is that everybody is still worried about whether they do have enough. We've clients have got, tens of millions of rands potentially, and they're still worried, which for the average person is just kind of hard to fathom. So that concept of have I got enough, is really unique and specific to each individual. So it really goes back to understanding, what sits behind that. What does having enough actually mean to you in terms of, lifestyle, that feeling that you're going to be okay? Because it's a moving target. The idea of, what means enough or having enough when you're 40 is very different to when you 60 or 65. So that target's also adjusting and moving. So it's really almost trying to understand what sits behind, the having enough, and also being comfortable with knowing that there's an uncertainty attached to that, because the future is unpredictable. So, we also like to unpack that and take a step back, before putting numbers to anything, because, numbers are forever moving targets. So that understanding what is enough it's a deeper question beyond just a headline number. And a lot of people get attached to a headline number And we actually want to step back from that first to kind of understand what sits behind, what enough is and what it means.
Mm. Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, the number doesn't exist. It's about that meaning behind that. It's like, okay, what is it that you're wanting to achieve? What is it that you want for your family? What are those things? And then kind of doing the calculations behind that to see if you're on track or you have enough. And it's not a number of like, I need X amount. It's kind of around the opportunity that it creates for you.
No, exactly. And, you can run the most sophisticated models and formulas and projections and what have you, but life doesn't happen in a vacuum. Life doesn't live on a spreadsheet. We like to talk about, the concept of, life happens, things happen in life, health issues, people get divorced or they have children or they, remarry or they sell businesses or, like we said, people get ill, and all of those kinds of things obviously can, have a significant impact on all of that, and what having enough means. So there also needs to be an element of, flexibility, not only in the planning, but also in your thinking, and not being overly focused on a specific number, because that number is inevitably going to evolve as well, function of, investment markets and all those other things. So, one wants to also be quite adaptable and flexible in one's thinking, because otherwise it also creates that sense of anxiety. You always, that focused on a number or a goal. And one needs to understand that goal and that target inevitably is going to move as life happens. But the behaviors and actions that underpin that, I think, are ultimately just as important as trying to kind of figure out what that number is.
I mean, you touched on a point around anxiety. Quite often people have anxiety because they haven't saved enough. Do you think there's ever an anxiety because people actually just don't know where they are in that journey?
I think that's, it's certainly part of that, so having a framework, absolutely helps. Me and you both, we've done endurance events from, Ironmans to comrades and what have you. And having a structured framework, I guess, plan to help you get there and kind of run the race, so to speak, effectively, is certainly important. But, with all the best laid training and plans in the world, on the day, there's lots of stuff that can happen and go wrong. So part of our role certainly is to help people provide a roadmap, provide structure, provide kind of clarity so that they understand where they are and where they're trying to get. But at the same time, understand that, that journey is never a smooth journey, and we have to be adaptable and deal with things as they arise. And that comes back to that feeling of, being comfortable with, the future being unknown, inherent uncertainty, and then being flexible to adjust as and when, one needs to.
I mean, I have to laugh, They say, how do you know if a guy's done an Ironman, he'll tell them.
He'll tell you about it. Exactly.
So there we go. But yeah, for me, I mean, obviously, like, all clients are different, their circumstances are different. But I mean, quite often, when a client comes to you and they can see, they present their financials and you can understand their lifestyle, quite frugal. And intuitively, you can kind of see they're okay, It kind of reminds me of a story. We talk about running. When Carl Peter got into running, I'd done a couple of half marathons beforehand, and in the eyes of Carl Peter, I was this like elite athlete, like I wasn't. But kind of chatting to you and trying to like having these conversations for you to kind of do your first half marathon, you had an anxiety around that. It was like you didn't know what you didn't know. And I remember clearly like asking some questions, like, what are you currently running? And you said you're doing like a 10K in the forest at like in 50 minutes. And I was like, crikey, man, of course you're going to be okay. And you went on and did that first half marathon and you like smashed it, Quite often, I think that I enjoy and to bring this back to like a financial planning conversation, I enjoy when clients they don't know they're okay, and they have this anxiety. And it's kind of like when we show them those steps and the plans that they are okay, it's quite a gratifying experience for us. Um, yeah, I think, but like you said, it kind of starts like about knowing what it is that you want to achieve, and then kind of figure out if you can get there, and also being nimble enough to be able to change, because life changes. We had COVID, suddenly the whole world was shutting down, markets were tanking. That brought a lot of anxiety. And sometimes it wasn't just around financial security. I mean, there were other anxieties around that. Clients just they want to know they were okay financially, they could go through this, but kind of saw it was about checking that in their family, checking in their neighbors. It didn't matter whether you had this Ferrari parked in the garage because you couldn't drive it. So there are more sort of subtle things to how much is enough. It's not just about a number. It's not about the nuts and bolts. It's more this holistic sort of approach to it.
Well, exactly that. I mean, you can have the biggest bank balance in the world, and the state of your relationships are terrible, and your health is terrible, and the value of all your assets and money is meaningless. So part of what we try and do and want to help people and our clients with is kind of understand what's really important to you and your life, and your sense of well-being, and that feeling of being okay. And a lot of that does extend to, our personal relationships, relationships with family, with kids, with friends, et cetera, et cetera. And often the most, and I mean, that's the old cliche, but, the most valuable things in life are often free. You can't put a price on your health, on the value of, the quality of your relationships. We're very blessed living in South Africa in terms of all the things that we have on our doorsteps, from, mountains to beaches to, landscape and scenery. And enjoying a lot of that doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money.
Mm.
So it's also helping, people understand, well, money can take you so far, but, a lot of the things that, give you joy and pleasure aren't necessarily about money.
Mm.
So it is also about framing priorities. And helping people understand, okay, well, what is actually important? Where are you going to get meaning out of your life? And then, money can and hopefully is then a tool to help you enjoy some of those things. People also like to do things like travel and, and things like that. So, yeah, so the conversation is a lot, we like to think a lot deeper than just, a monetary one, to help people find that sense of comfort and security, and deal with that kind of uncertainty and anxiety that a lot of people feel, whether you've got, tons of money in the bank or you don't. People still across the spectrum feel those anxieties. So our role is to kind of help guide them through that with a plan, with a strategy, like we said. But, that plan and strategy also has to be flexible and, has to evolve. And it's something that's deeply personal to all of us, because we all want different things. We've all got in our own minds an idea of what, okay means. And it's trying to understand that at an individual level.
Mm.
So, we can help people on that journey.
Mm. I mean, beyond the spreadsheets and, I think it's quite easy to kind of get wrapped up and, not spending money, not enjoying, those things that you spoke about because you're chasing some number. Also, not everyone wakes up having this 10, 20-year plan. I mean, quite often we ask our clients that don't know this, is we kind of reframe it to say that if money wasn't an option, how would you be living your life differently? Because that kind of shifts clients back into, taking those limiting lenses off their mind and going, well, if you had a blank canvas, what are those important things to you? The family, the travel, the relationships. And then once we kind of unpack and understand that, I think our role is to be able to go back and then crunch those numbers to kind of support that lifestyle. I mean, what other things do you think we find with clients that are limiting factors to live their best lives?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that. I mean, you know, it, it's a question of often, the life is a question of decision making trade offs. We want to encourage people to, enjoy today, live your best life now, as far as possible. But at the same time, there needs to be an element of, forward thinking, responsibility. Okay, well, how do I provide, for my future self? And often, immediate pressures are quite difficult. If you've got a growing family and you've got to pay, bring up kids, take them through school, all those kinds of things, that's expensive.
Mm.
Plus, you still want to, enjoy life as it is. So how does one, I guess, navigate those trade-offs that most people need to make today? And that's true whether you kind of building up towards achieving financial security or financial independence, but that's also true. Once you navigate into transition into kind of retirement years. So, I mean, are there any things that come to mind? On your side, some of the difficult or interesting conversations that we have with
Yeah.
clients on that.
I mean, I think if you look at some clients that are in that accumulation phase, they're not quite there yet. They're kind of building towards it. That's kind of there's some nuances around there. But then there are those families that actually have enough. But they might have inherited some wealth, from a first generation. They've seen, personally, the sacrifices that first generation made, and they look at money and wealth a little bit differently, and sometimes they hesitant to spend because they've seen that sacrifice, and they, it's again, if you ask them this question, if money isn't an option, how do you live your life differently? And they start answering that, to have those conversations with them to show them that they can still enjoy that life and still be okay and respect money. So yeah, for me, I really enjoy that part, is to get people to shift, to say that you actually do have enough money. You do have, for your lifetime, the next generation, if used wisely, and they're always going to use it wisely, but
Mm.
they kind of hold on to this money and just kind of accumulate it, and they don't enjoy the life. I think that's a really enjoyable part of what we do. And then also, on the flip side of that is kind of showing people that, maybe the burn rate that they're going through money is not going to support those goals, those things that are really, really important to them. So it's just kind of like being able to show them that, and then dial it back a little bit, and look at those trade-offs. You can do this, you can buy the Coke, but then you can't buy the chocolate. What's really important to you, and it's about being realistic about their situation and their goals, and kind of stepping into that. I mean, we've had conversations with clients who have unrealistic goals, might have accumulated a lot of wealth, but their burn rate is just so high. So, it's kind of showing people a possibility, and then getting them to kind of make those steps to live their best version of their lives.
No, exactly. I mean, yeah, that's an interesting, point you raised about, some people and clients of ours have more than enough, yet they're nervous to spend money because there is that anxiety and fear about, is it still enough? Are we going to run out? And there's something quite, gratifying on our side when we go, well, actually,
Hmm.
we encourage you to spend more because you've got more than enough. Spend some more, do some of the things that you haven't done, enjoy your life, and almost giving people permission to be able to do that. That is certainly very fulfilling. And we've actually, had numerous conversations like that recently. And then to your point, exactly that. It's also being, realistic with people, and helping people understand, based on, your current burn rate, your current lifestyle, relative to, the capital and resources you have available, this isn't sustainable. And then it does become that question around, okay, well, do you really need to spend money on, X, Y, and Z and all these things, just accumulating more stuff? Or, are there ways that you can, think about this differently, and reallocate that? So, and that's part of our kind of philosophy and mantra as well. It's about having honest and realistic conversations with people, not promising the world, not over promising. We want to, help people achieve, a comfortable life, based on, very realistic, ideas and assumptions, and rather than, over promise, under deliver, and then, things go wrong, and, we don't believe that's kind of the right way of doing things either. So, yeah, so again, it just comes to that about everybody is different, and tailoring our conversations to, where people are. We often speak about, meeting you where you're at. And that's the ability then to, have an honest conversation around where are you right now? Where are you trying to get? And sometimes those conversations, are uncomfortable because, there is a mismatch between, people where they think they are and, the reality. And it's important to discuss those with them, to kind of put in a realistic strategy, hopefully that can, that can support them. Coming back to the running analogy, somebody who's only fit enough or trained enough to, run a 4-hour marathon, for example, but in their minds, they're going to run it in 3 hours, 3 hours. It's that kind of similar, I guess, philosophy when it comes to, understanding your resources, your burn rate, your expenditure, and what's realistic, etc. So, yeah, so that's kind of that behavioral side of what we do is often underestimated because it is more than just crunching numbers, and where we think we can add a lot of value.
Yeah, I mean, I think Lindsay Parry spoke about comrades. Is you get the race that your training deserves, and I guess it's like that. It's around the discipline in terms of the financial planning as well. That's the life that you're going to get.
No, exactly, and and on that, absolutely, But you can also have the perfect training, but on the day things can still go wrong. The weather is extreme. You get cramps. Stuff happens. And on the day, you could still, you've trained brilliantly, and you can still bomb out, or you have to adjust. You need to run slower because you got cramps, or So again, that flexibility on race day, so to speak, is also important, and that's why, we often say, you can have the best plan in the world, but it's ultimately the outcomes that matter.
Absolutely.
And that, that's forever changing, and evolving.
I mean, I had a conversation with a client actually on the way here this morning. He rode the Nissan Trail Seeker out in Bunhook this weekend, and I mean, he's a beast on the bike. He's been training since he was 9 months old. And he said he just had a terrible day. It was like hot. The one climb was like 43 degrees. He says he hated every moment, and he said he felt so good up into the month. So, these things happen, but it's also how you bounce back and you're kind of resilient. You touched on behavioral things now. We have a money story, and our money story is like the lens in terms of like that a lot of us, run our lives and our financial lives, and we have biases whether that's the way you grew up. How much do you think that sort of is able to change? Do you think people can change their money story?
I mean, that's interesting, and you've gone through significant kind of coaching and coaching programs to understand that and enable those kinds of conversations with people. I certainly think exactly that. We all have our money stories. Often a function of our upbringing. Was money scarce, or did we kind of grow up in a sense of abundance? Were we kind of taught good money habits by our peers, our parents, or, and then often, mothers and fathers are different. And, so one might be a spendthrift and another one, might just happily, spend a lot of money and blow money on unnecessary things. But I like to think through, awareness, education. It's about understanding our blind spots, our weaknesses, our limitations, being aware of our money story. It's not necessarily that, we're going to change it, but through that awareness, we can make, better decisions. So when you understand a limiting factor, whether, somebody, for example, who just wants to believes in squirreling money away for the future, saving diligently, but actually, forgets to enjoy the now a little bit, enjoy life, through that awareness, I think there is the ability to, make better and healthier choices, I mean, that's my view. I mean, I guess the coaching and the work you've done on that side, I mean, I'm sure you've kind of discovered lots of interesting things about that.
I think you're absolutely right there. And that's why I like when we do modeling for our clients. It's not the be all end all. It's a snapshot of where you are, but it gives you a sense of, the outcome of a decision that you make now, or a decision that you don't make. Leaving money in cash, earning a low interest rate, a taxable interest rate, sounds like a safe option to go, but it might not support the goals that they want to achieve in the long run. And so what I like about that modeling is like if you do nothing differently, this is how your possible situation could look like. Those trade-offs, spending a little bit less, saving for longer, taking a little bit more risk on your investment with the idea of trying to target a higher return. Those do move the dial, but they move the dial over time, that compounded. And, we heard, we know compound interest is, one of the great wonders of the world, but the inverse is true. Those bad habits also compound, and you create this sort of big widening gap. So I think it's the framing is great. If we show people those scenarios, because we create that awareness. We don't go through school learning this. And if our parents don't have sort of strong skills around being able to save money and sort of save for a rainy day, we just carry on, like a headless chicken, so to speak. So having honest conversations, showing people the impacts. I mean, it's meaningful. And what I was thinking now while we're talking, we're talking about how much is enough, and this is a financial planning podcast, but we haven't spoken about a product or a tax saving or because that's kind of at the end of these initial conversations. Important is unpacking what that looks like. We talk about financial freedom to our clients. It's trying to understand, it's like, what does financial freedom mean to you? And that's always a great anchor to have all these other conversations from.
Yeah, exactly that. And I mean, you mentioned an interesting point there about kind of timelines and time frames. And, when we kind of look at the evolution of one's, life and financial journey, it really is a planning process that, spans decades. Whether you kind of, 30 and, you've got, 30 plus years to go until, retirement, so to speak. And then another kind of 30 years, beyond that, beyond retirement, or even if you're at retirement and you potentially, have a lifespan of, 30 years plus. These are long periods of time in terms of, conceptualizing and planning. And I think we've become so conditioned to think in kind of shorter time frames now, a function of the way the world is now with, social media and information. And so also I think, conceptually, in our minds, thinking out, and conceptualizing things in decades rather than, next month, next year, or the next 5 years. I think kind of that's also important, in terms of framing expectations and often, building towards something. And the consistency of having good habits over a long period of time, because coming back to that, bad habits also compound. Uh, you know, the effect of good habits are compounded over a long period of time, but it takes time to typically see the benefits, and the results of that. And that's something, and to your point, from an industry perspective, it's very much still by and large product focused.
Mm.
You need this product or that product, or for us, products are incidental. That's something that comes, right at the end potentially. Kind of once we understand, long term, what are we building towards, and then potentially what products do we need to support that. Whereas the industry typically is still all about, okay, well, let's sell you a product now, and hopefully it gets you where you need to be one day. And for us, that's just like illogical, and that's backwards in the way
Mm.
uh, how things should basically be done. And I know you've always been really passionate about that initial planning, and framing and conceptualizing, to help people kind of really understand that, and
Yeah.
and helping them understand, I guess, the purpose of their wealth. Giving wealth purpose. We like to speak about that.
I mean, I'll touch on the giving wealth purpose, but like your first point about that passion, I think, and to tie into some of the sporting things, we grew up, like in the 80s watching Comrades, in the Bruce Fordyce era. And, like never in my wildest dream did I think I would ever complete a Comrades. Now, I'm not saying everyone should to do a Comrades, but I guess it's kind of like that kind of stretch goal, that's out there that you don't think is possible. And actually, when you make the decision, because the decision is the first thing that you need to do. This is like what I want. I want financial freedom. I want to, not be reliant on things, on a job or whatever the case may be. But it was a decision to make, Comrades. And, what did we do, or what did I do? It was go hire a coach, someone who has experience, who's taken athletes through this journey, who's able to break this down into bite-size, building blocks, to be able to get me there. Now, I know you and I differ there. You've got the discipline. You just, what needs to be done. You just go do it, and you're going to succeed. And some people are like that financially. They've I don't know if it's a gene, or they've got some skill set, or it's indoctrinated through their parents. I don't know what it is, but for me, I found great value in joining a coach, and getting that plan, and eventually achieving that, which I never thought was possible. And I think, I guess, bring that back to financial planning. A lot of people can do these financial planning by themselves, and they did really, really well too. What we are finding is, some clients that we've dealt with that have been very successful, is they think that once you've reached this number, that it sort of solves everything, but actually sometimes that brings extra complexity
Mhm.
and more anxiety. Now all of a sudden it's the onshore offshore mix, the tax, the global, the CITES. There's all these sort of things that are noises that kind of take away from the peace they could actually be in. And so for me, again, that's, so it's understanding what this goal is, showing people how they stack up towards that goal, whether it be visually, whether it be through cash flow modelings and graphs, and, because that sets the scene, to kind of gauge what I need, what we should be doing. So for me, that's why, the clarity is important.
Just actually
Yeah.
on that is, you made an interesting point that, interestingly, we've had a lot of new clients recently that have come on board who have been very successful, and, like we said, kind of DIY type investors, for a long period of time, build big portfolios and what have you. But with a certain level of complexity, there's also, stress and pressure on them, am I making the right decisions? The burden of having to make that decision themselves. What am I missing? What am I getting right? So often, like with having a coach, to your point, beyond the training plan or whatever, it's just having a sounding board. Somebody you can talk ideas through with, what about this idea? What about that idea? How do we optimize this more effectively without having to, just make changes for change's sake? So having that sort of that sounding board that also then removes some of the anxiety of, whether it's that family patriarch or, business owner or whatever the case is, in terms of their decision making. There's a lot of value in that. And just providing some kind of structure and framework. Often they're doing a lot of the right things, but there's certain things like with any, training program where you're using a coach or a mentor or, in our case, being their advisor, there's little things that we can, bring into things that make their life more efficient, take some of the stress off of them, and just give them that kind of peace of mind, knowing that, okay, I've got somebody on my side who's helping me, helping my family, and ultimately helping us kind of achieve what's, ultimately important. And that again, it goes beyond just the number and the numbers. There's that kind of relationship, personal human touch, that's super important.
Yeah, I mean, I think about a couple of years ago attending a Gary Kirsten talk when he went over to coach India. Like how do you go and coach like Sachin Tendulkar? Like this, like, and his approach then was just like he went to him. He said, like, what can I do for you? Like, I can't tell you, you're the goat, you're the greatest. And so, coming back to that, is a lot of our clients have done phenomenally well. And our role as advisor is not competing. It's not necessarily we always giving the direction, but it's that sparring, that complementary, that ability to go back and, do extra research, to summarize that research, to come back using, networks, contacts to kind of make their lives easier and to kind of spar and debate with it. But the anxiety, I'm just thinking of a few families where, the patriarch and matriarchs, they have that responsibility, with like great power comes great responsibility. But it's like, well, if I make a mistake now, there are huge implications to it, and that creates extra anxiety. And also then the anxiety of like all that knowledge really sits with me. So some of the conversations we're having with clients is how do we, create that family wealth charter? How do we bring the whole family in so that the whole family understands the values of money and what the family's trying to achieve, not just for this generation, but potentially for generations to come. Because if you have this framework, it becomes quite easy to make decisions by, I mean, even in our own business, strategically, we have those guiding principles. You and I, we think quite similarly, but sometimes we have different ideas, or we sort of go back to, I don't know, we fall back into our personalities. And sometimes we have an idea. It's to go back to those guiding principles, and does that still serve our business? Or in the case of financial planning, does it still serve the family? Then it's easier to make decisions by, because you're taking the emotion out of it.
Exactly that. I mean, it's just giving people confidence often to make decisions.
Yeah.
And having a framework to make decisions, which then kind of breeds confidence, etc. And that doesn't mean you get things right all the time. But, there's a deep value kind of in that, in helping people gain clarity, gain confidence in making decisions, because it's also easy, as we know, sometimes people get paralyzed and fearful in terms of, making a decision sometimes and then end up doing nothing, which in itself, when you often do nothing, that's also a decision, which can have, harmful long-term consequences. So there's exactly that, a lot of value in helping people with that confidence and that decision-making.
Yeah. I mean, I know we'll get to this in future episodes, but, one practical example, that we deal with quite a lot is, you make a decision on a portfolio, sometimes it's a trigger for capital gains tax, and they kind of people are they're so scared of doing that, but they will sit in a particular counter or a share or a portfolio that will go nowhere slowly just so they don't have to pay capital gains tax. And I mean, we don't have to go into that, but it's those kind of fears. And through our conversations, again, does this serve the family in terms of the greater goal? Yes, no. How do we reposition, reframe? Yes, you might pay some capital gains tax and rebalance the portfolio, but you're opening up to something that's more diversified, that has a greater chance, and you're likely to, make that up, sooner rather than later. And because we're not looking about a 6-month plan, clients see CGT now, but it's the effect of that over 10, 20 years that really counts. And so that's that ability, again, have this vision, how much is enough? What is financial freedom? What does that mean? And keep coming back to every decision you make. It's kind of anchored back to that. Does it serve that? And ultimately, then you can get to answer that question of how much is enough.
Exactly that. I mean, so if I guess if we had to start summing up and, want to leave people with a few key takeaways from, what having enough means, how would you kind of encapsulate that?
Well, I think we often talk about clarity, right? So, if clarity is a big word, there's a lot sitting behind clarity. But it's first kind of understanding, like, what is it that you want to achieve? Like in your own words, I want to spend more time with family. I want to do this. I don't want to be reliant on having to work for a boss. I want to work a 4-day week, whatever that is for you, and clients are experts in their own life, they want a return on life, right? So if we can kind of understand what that looks like, it's then we can kind of build models to be able to see, are we on track? Are we supporting that? What needs to be done? What small trade-offs, need to be done to sort that? So I think it starts with like clarity. I leave it at that.
Okay. And to give a couple of tangible examples and practical steps maybe of the kinds of things we may have done, for clients recently, if you had to pick out, a couple there, for anybody that watches this that they could, take away.
In terms of clarity, or just in terms of
just generally,
Well, I'll say it's kind of difficult. You want to protect the names, protect the innocent, and no, I guess I kind of alluded to it, like in some of the conversations. It was just being able to, if you think of someone who, or a family, or an individual who has the means and ability to get to financial freedom, right? But they're not on track because they don't have that clarity. And there've been numerous clients I can think of that we've been able to frame that, and they've just commented about they've not got the confidence to live life. If you, and it's kind of weird, if you know where you're going to, and you've got that like clarity of what you want to achieve, and you've got the confidence, it also opens up a door to be able to, if you have additional funds or additional capital, to use that for some of the things that you also want to be doing for fun, because you've got the confidence that you're on track. And yeah, I'm just thinking of families where we talk about giving like wealth purpose. Is just to like suddenly, they have a lot of money, or not suddenly, I mean, they've had a lot of money, but suddenly everyone knows what the role of this money is. And it's, we don't have to be ashamed about it. We don't have to be scared of it, afraid of it. It's kind of there to live our best lives, whether that's for them, for the next generations, whether it's in terms of like, them wanting to get involved in like charitable bequests. It just gives that family a sense of being together, kind of being on a joint journey, yet leading their individual lives. So without going into too details, I've really enjoyed that. Again, to bring back to the sports thing, I really enjoyed. You didn't know that you would be okay at your first half marathon. Now you like running close to sub 3 hour marathons,
Not quite, but
but you know what I mean? Well, I mean, well, you had like a 90-minute half marathon, sub 90-minute half marathon, 10 years ago, you didn't even know if you'd be able to finish a half marathon. I knew you could, like there was no doubt, but it was the beauty was actually to get to see that possibility and enjoy it. And I think with financial planning, that's been really great for me, is to get people to see that possibility and live their best lives. Yourself?
No, agreed. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, right? So when you kind of start on a journey, whether it's, a financial journey or training for, a half marathon or whatever, you're into, that initial stage is always daunting. That insecurity, not knowing whether, you're going to get where you want to, go, whether you're going to be able to finish the race, whether you're going to achieve your financial goals. But, by taking consistently positive action, slowly your confidence in that begins to increase. And that's why, it comes back to, us being very much an outcomes driven business, helping people achieve the outcomes and the things that they say they're important to them. And there needs to be a bit of kind of structure behind that, like you have a structured training plan, to run a park run or a 10K or half marathon or, an ultra marathon or whatever the case is. There's a lot of confidence in having that kind of that structure, that roadmap, having signposts along the way to know whether, am I on track? Am I ahead? Am I behind? What I need to do? And then again, like we said, having that kind of flexibility to know that, come the day, come the hour, things might happen. Things might, go wrong, like things happen or go wrong in life. And then, having somebody there to support you, to guide you through that, to, still make good decisions. But absolutely that, there's always an anxiety or a fear about the future, the unknown. But it's also, knowing that that's okay. We don't have to have all the answers just yet, but progressively over time, as our confidence improves, as we do more and more of the right things, that you always like to talk about, possibilities, and we start to see those possibilities become clearer in our minds, as you get closer and closer and closer, and you go, oh, wow, aha. And suddenly you've completed that race or, achieved your goal. And then looking back now, I mean, we both look back now and we kind of almost sometimes, we have a chuckle and think, how did we ever actually do that? Starting out, we thought not a chance in hell are we ever going to do some of those things. But now we can look back and go, oh my gosh, we actually did. And, and with a real sense of kind of amazement, and not because, we did anything, amazing or smart or clever. It's just because we followed a structured process to get us there. And there's, there's power in that, which I think is really important.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think, thinking about like what we try to achieve today and possibly in, future episodes, it's like we want to leave people with sort of better questions, and it's not necessarily answers, but it's, if we have better questions to ask ourselves, what we want, what's important to us, if money wasn't an option, if you didn't have to think about that, like what would you want for your life? And I think if you can start answering those questions, it becomes a lot easier to define what is enough, how much is enough.
Agreed.
Great. So it was a good good first attempt. We didn't make too many mess ups and, want to be as authentic as possible.
Episode 1 done.